my personal highlights this year in serving on the board has been getting to know this wonderful woman. And she is more than a speaker to me. She is now a friend, a dear, dear friend. With that motto about gift, to gift us with the history of NSA Colorado, please help me welcome the 1993-94 president of NSA Colorado and our chapter co-founder, Judy Sabah.
Conversation with Joe a few minutes ago. There he is. And he said, Judy, your first order of business is to look out into the audience and say to all the people in attendance, if you have your name tag on the left side, move it to the right side, please, now. Because we do not want to get into this presentation with Joe even a little bit upset. Sometimes my heart whispers to me, tells me what direction to go, who to call. Maybe that happens to you too. In 1956, my dear friend, my former spouse, to him I was his #1 angel, started his career by taking the Dale Carnegie course, Steubenville, Ohio. He graduated with honors and became a graduate assistant. And then his heart whispered to him, and he left his job as bookkeeper for Pure Milk Dairy and went into the life insurance business. He got promoted. He was moved from Steubenville, Ohio to Reston, Virginia, and then to San Francisco, California, always being promoted. And he was a very successful life insurance agent and vice president, etc. And then one day, his heart whispered, it's time to make a change. He moved to Portland, Oregon, and started working for the American Motivational Association. American Motivational Association was headed up by John Hammond. Some of you might remember John Hammond. He went on to be NSA president in '87 and '88. And the job of American Motivational Association was to sponsor programs all around the country. It was kind of maybe a forerunner for the positive thinking rallies. And they would have speakers like Og Mandino and Zig Ziglar, Kevin Robert, Marilyn Vanderburg, and Joe sold tickets for those programs. So in 1974, John said to Joe, would you be interested in going to Denver? The guy who's selling tickets in Denver quit. And I need somebody to fill 1,000 seats at the Phipps Auditorium. And Joe said, I'll go. Joe came to Denver and sold that program and then made a decision to stay in Denver. He also had programs in 1975 and 1976. Meanwhile, what do you think Judy was doing? She was a checker at Target Foods in Lakewood. And then one day, her heart whispered, and she said, it's time to take another direction. And she became self-employed. Now, I'm not going to waste any time trying to get you to figure out what I went self-employment to, so I'll just tell you. I became a wallpaper hanger. That worked for a couple of months, and then in 1973, January, my life was influenced by a guy named Glenn W. Turner. Is there anyone here who recognizes that name? Glenn W. Turner, in the late 60s and early 70s, started a company called Dare to Be Great. And I was a prime prospect because I was now learning about things that I had never learned about. And so I saw him the first time on what was called the Red Suit film. He was sitting on a bar stool. He was a hairlip from South Carolina, so he spoke with a little bit of an accent, which I cannot impersonate, but I'll see. And he said words to me directly that I had not ever heard before in my entire life. He said, you can be and do whatever you want. I believe in you more than you believe in you. Those words changed my life. I was going this way, and I started going this way. I enrolled in a course called Adventures in Attitudes because I had been listening to the motivational sets that Glenn W. Turner sold through the company Dare to Be Great. And I was getting all of these positive messages. So Adventures in Attitudes was the next thing for me. Now, in 1976, I got the first brochure about the program that Joe was doing here in Denver. And I was getting this brochure because Joe had bought the Adventures in Attitudes mailing list. What are you saying, Ruby? Oh, it's okay. So I went to that program. And then after that, in 1977, a guy came to our house to sell us a half a beef and 6 months worth of vegetables. It was very popular at that time. And as I was talking to the salesman, he said to me, tell me a little bit about you. So I told him about my new career, which was now selling figurette custom fit bras door to door. And that was pretty successful. I'd worn that bra since 1969. I was a product of the product. So he said, if you want to be successful, you have to do two things. You have to meet Bill Shuck. He sells motivational materials and training materials. And you've got to visit Swap Club. Salesman with a purpose. Come back now, salesman with a purpose. And so I went to downtown Swap, and it was incredible. Exceeded my expectations. And became a member, and wouldn't you know, Joe Sabah, he was president of Aurora Swap. And we would go to different meetings and steal each other's banner. And so that was the beginning of our relationship. You can see the joy that was in our activities. We were both involved in SWAP International, both served as officers. As our relationship and friendship developed in 1980, we started dating. In 81, we got married. And in 1982, we had the opportunity to start this awesome chapter. Now, one of the things that I'd like to let you in on this is the secret here. When Joe was in the life insurance business, he learned about keeping track of every single person he met. He did this on 3x5 cards. And then when he came to Denver to do the programs, he kept track of every single person he met. Name, address, telephone number, birthdays, family member names. That was the beginning of Joe's database, which has expanded tremendously. So when we started the chapter, there had been other people, 3 other people, tried to start a chapter, as I understand, several years before, and couldn't get it off the ground. But they didn't have what we had. We had a database. When Joe was in the hospital and Dean Sabah came to be with him, Joe told him, I have 14,000 names and phone numbers in my phone. He was very proud of his database. His database is what helped him become what the title that he loved so much, a professional seat filler. He loved that for the rest of his life. You see, Joe and I were divorced in 1998, but we were never separated. We had different roles in our lives, but we had 42 years together. And so Joe lives inside of me, and I talk to him every day. And Joe Sabah lives inside of each one of you as well, and you can talk to him every day. So what we had was an appreciation, and what I still have, and Joe still has, an appreciation for people, a love for people. We had joy and passion, and we had a partnership. Joe and I are both visionaries, and Joe was just a little bit deficient in the practical. And I would make up for that. I was the practical one. And many times we would stand, I remember in my kitchen, and he was, he just wanted the big picture, and I wanted the details. So I'd be telling him the details, and he'd stand there and go, wrap it up. And we had the database. And that made the difference. And Joe used that database to the max. Is there anyone in this audience that did not receive email from Joe? And think about how many members that Joe brought to this chapter with his emails. For years, Joe and I have both been completely involved in this chapter. It's our family. when his family asked him to move to North Carolina or Texas or California so that he could be with his family, he said, "My family is here." So I would ask you to think about these things. And I'd also ask you, what is your heart whispering? Thank you so much.
Judy, thank you so much for sharing. We have some flowers and a card for you. We also want to recognize anyone who has won the Sabah Award. Will you please stand?
Wow.
All right.
The Sabah Award was an idea that Suzanne Vaughn, also a winner of the Sabah Award and a past president, had in the early 90s. And this is the first Sabah Award that was given to Joe and Judy and in 1995. And we'll have it out there on the table along with many other things.
Speaking of the table, out there on the table is a book. Some photos are in there, some stories of Joe. If you would sign the book, if you have not yet, or put a little note in there, we're going to be presenting that to Judy. We'd love for you to make any notes or any comments and share your stories of Joe with her and memorialize those in the book. Thank you again, Judy. We love having you as co-founder of our chapter. Thank you.